There's a silent epidemic infecting modern men. It doesn't leave bruises, it doesn't show up on x-rays, but it destroys something far more essential than muscle or bone. It erodes a man's identity from the inside out. It begins early. You're just a boy, maybe 5 or 6. You reach for what you want, you speak without hesitation, you say no when something doesn't feel right. And then correction. Sharp, subtle. Maybe it's a disapproving look from your teacher, a scolding from your parents, a punishment for having a voice too loud, too real, too raw. So you begin to shrink. You learn that being good means being agreeable, that keeping the peace means silencing your truth, that you earn love by being small, safe, and self-sacrificing. And by the time you're a man, you've mastered the art of disappearing in plain sight, smiling when you're dying inside, nodding when your instincts scream to rebel, becoming a chameleon not out of strategy, but out of survival. That is the real pandemic, not loneliness, not depression, but the compulsive need to be liked. You say yes when you mean no. You make yourself available to people who wouldn't cross the street for you. You stay quiet in rooms where your voice could shift the entire energy. Why? Because you've been trained to equate approval with worth. You've been lied to, taught that being harmless makes you holy, that if you just keep giving one day, they'll finally see your value. But let's be honest, they won't. They don't see the nice guy. They use him. They rely on him. But they never respect him, because in this world, respect is born of power, and power does not beg to be liked. Every time you betray your instincts to make someone else comfortable, you die a little inside. Every time you hold back your truth to avoid conflict, you dig a deeper grave for your own self-respect. You become agreeable, predictable, easy to manage, and eventually easy to forget. No one fears a man who needs to be liked. They tolerate him. They mock him in private. They praise his kindness while walking all over his boundaries. And when his usefulness dries up, so does the attention. That's why the man obsessed with being liked always ends up broken, confused, bitter, because he gave everything and still got nothing back. But it wasn't the world that betrayed him. It was himself. He abandoned his edge, his fire, his masculine presence, all for a smile he never really earned. This epidemic doesn't look like disease. It looks like the guy who says no worries when he's actually furious. It looks like the man who jokes through his pain because expressing it would feel like weakness. It looks like the husband who's terrified of his wife's disapproval, the employee who does the work of 3 men but never asks for a raise, the man who confuses being tolerated with being loved. He's not living, he's performing. And every performance costs him a piece of his soul. But here's the truth, they never told you. You weren't born to be soft. You weren't made to be liked. You were made to lead, to protect, to command attention not by force, but by presence. And that presence begins the moment you stop performing and start remembering who the hell you are. So, if you've ever swallowed your truth just to keep the peace, if you've ever smiled through disrespect, if you've ever felt invisible in rooms you built with your own effort, then understand this. You're not broken. You're conditioned. But conditioning can be undone. Performance can be dropped. And approval, it can be replaced with power. The cure is not more niceness. It's more truth, more boundaries, more unapologetic masculinity. Because the man who stops trying to be liked is the man who starts being respected. And in a world ruled by power, that's the only kind of man who survives. Obedience is not respect. They want you to believe otherwise. They want you to think that being obedient, being polite, compliant, agreeable, is how you earn your place in this world. They told you that if you were loyal, if you gave everything, if you stayed quiet and never made waves, then someone would eventually reward you. But that's the trap. Because obedience doesn't inspire respect, it breeds expectation. The more obedient you become, the more they expect. Not gratitude, not recognition, just more compliance. And here's what no one says out loud. The man who is always obedient becomes invisible. He is tolerated, but never feared. Useful, but never respected. He is the one who bends his back for the world, only to be forgotten the moment he needs support himself. It starts in childhood. You are praised for being the good boy, for not complaining, for following the rules, for not talking back. You learn that strength lies in silence, that being agreeable earns you approval. But that lesson poisons your soul, because what it really teaches you is to abandon your instincts in favor of control, to ignore your truth for applause. And once you enter the adult world, that training follows you like a leash. At work, you're the reliable guy. You pick up the slack, work late, do more than your share. But the promotion goes to the one who knows how to say no. In relationships, you give everything: your time, your energy, your soul. But you're the one who gets left because you never created gravity. You were available, but never valuable. You were loyal, but not respected. You thought your obedience would protect you, but it only made you predictable. And in a world ruled by strategy, predictability is weakness. This is what Machiavelli warned us about. In The Prince, he didn't write about how to be loved. He wrote about how to survive, how to rise in a world where power, not politeness, governs your fate. He wrote about how obedience without leverage becomes servitude, about how loyalty, when not backed by strength, becomes a death sentence. You think you're being noble. You think that enduring, sacrificing, staying loyal, no matter the cost, makes you a man of principle. But the truth: you're just easy to control. The boss keeps you underpaid because you never ask. Your partner silences you emotionally because she knows you won't leave. Your friends walk over your boundaries because they know you won't enforce them. That's not love. That's management. And you're not a respected man. You're a useful tool. Let this truth hit you hard. Obedience earns you position, but never power. And without power, even the loyalty you give can be weaponized against you. The man who refuses to question, the man who never draws a line, the man who is afraid to walk away, he becomes a prisoner in his own life. And the world doesn't mourn prisoners. It replaces them. So stop confusing obedience with virtue. Stop mistaking compliance for strength, because the world does not protect the obedient, it drains them. If you've ever felt like your loyalty was taken for granted, if you've ever wondered why people stop valuing you the moment you stop giving, if you've ever been left behind by those you bent over backwards for, then understand this: you trained them to treat you that way. But that can end now. You don't need to become cruel, but you need to become clear. You don't need to raise your voice, but you need to raise your standards. Because respect begins when obedience ends. It begins the moment you say, "That's enough." It begins when you stop over-explaining your boundaries, when you stop showing up for people who vanish when you need them. And if you've ever looked in the mirror and wondered where your power went, this is where. You traded it for peace. You traded it for safety. You traded it for the illusion of being liked. Take it back. Let this be the moment you stop being the obedient man and start becoming the respected one. Loyalty without power is not virtue. It is a trap. You were taught to be loyal. That loyalty makes you noble, that it defines your character, that a good man stands by his people no matter what. But they never taught you the second half of the truth. They never told you that loyalty without leverage is how kings create slaves. You think you're being righteous, that standing by someone even when it hurts proves your strength. But what it really proves to those watching is that you don't know how to walk away, that you fear starting over more than you fear disrespect, and that makes you exploitable. Your boss praises your commitment until you ask for a raise. Your partner calls you dependable until you set a boundary. Your friends lean on you for help until the moment you need something back. Because loyalty, when given blindly, becomes a contract of your own erasure. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. He saw how rulers viewed loyalty not as something sacred, but as something useful. A loyal man was not cherished. He was managed, controlled, expected to obey, and discarded the moment he stopped serving the system. Let that sink in. The world doesn't love loyal men. It uses them. You were taught that loyalty buys you protection, but it doesn't. You were taught that it earns you trust, but it only earns you dependency. And you were taught that loyalty will be reciprocated, but often all it earns you is silence when you finally fall. And when you do fall, when you burn out, when you collapse under the weight of others' expectations, do not expect the applause you were promised. You will not get a standing ovation. You will not be remembered as the noble one. You'll be replaced, quietly, coldly, efficiently, because the system does not reward loyalty. It rewards power. Loyalty is only respected when it is a choice backed by strength. When it comes from a man who can walk away and chooses not to, not from fear, but from clarity. But you've stayed because you're scared. Scared of being alone, scared of disappointing others, scared of what it means to start over. So you call it loyalty, but it's not loyalty. It's submission in a noble disguise. And the more you give, the more they take. You think it's love, but it's dependency. You think it's partnership, but it's quiet domination. Because no one respects the man who can't say no. No one honors the man who never leaves. No one fears the man who tolerates anything. So if you're loyal to a company that drains your soul, loyal to a partner who manipulates your kindness, loyal to friends who disappear when you're in need, ask yourself one brutal question: is this loyalty or is it fear? You cannot claim strength while handing your power to people who would not bleed for you. You cannot claim wisdom while staying loyal to those who profit from your silence. And you cannot grow while staying planted in soil that poisons your roots. It is time to stop calling your imprisonment honor, because real honor does not require self-destruction. Real loyalty demands discernment. You must become the kind of man whose loyalty is rare, not automatic. A man whose allegiance must be earned, not assumed. That means having terms, boundaries, the ability to revoke your loyalty the moment it starts costing your self-respect. You are not a servant. You are not a dog trained to obey. You are not a permanent fixture in someone else's kingdom. You are your own ruler, and your loyalty. It is not a gift. It is a weapon. When placed in the right hands, it builds empires. When placed in the wrong ones, it becomes your undoing. So choose wisely. Be loyal to those who show up when it's inconvenient, to those who value your presence, not your compliance, to those who respect your boundaries, not just your usefulness. But above all, be loyal to yourself, to your evolution, to your instincts, to your rise. Because the man who refuses to walk away from what no longer serves him will never rise. He will stay small, stay broken, stay waiting for rewards that were never coming. Let today be the day you stop waiting. Let today be the day you reclaim your loyalty from the hands that never deserved it. Real power is not what you say. It's what they feel when you enter the room. You have been lied to since childhood. You were told that power comes from being loud, from convincing others, from proving your worth through effort, words, and achievements. But true power, the kind that commands silence, the kind that shifts energy without noise, is not built through explanation. It is built through perception. Think of the man who walks into a room and doesn't say a word, but everyone adjusts. They lower their voices. They choose their words more carefully. Not because he's rude, not because he's aggressive, but because his stillness feels like strength. Now contrast that with the man who talks too much, who over-explains, who justifies, who needs to be liked, who tries to win attention with charm, with stories, with validation-seeking. The truth. The louder you try to prove your power, the less they believe you have it. Power that needs to be proven is already in doubt. Machiavelli understood this deeply. He wrote, not for men who begged for love, but for those who could control fear. Not through violence, but through energy, through presence, through strategic silence. Because silence is not the absence of power, it is its most dangerous form. Silence forces others to project, to imagine your thoughts, to calculate your intentions, to fill in the blanks with respect or fear. And that's where power lives, not in what you say, but in what they think you might do. You see in the performance of life, the man who can remain unreadable, he wins. He is never easy to corner, never easy to manipulate, never easy to predict, because he doesn't give you his playbook. He lets you assume, and assumptions are always wrong. While the world is performing, he is observing. While others are reacting, he is calibrating. While men rush to speak, He studies how silence shapes perception. And that silence, it becomes a force, a weapon, a presence that lingers in every room he enters, even after he's gone. But the modern man has forgotten this. He rushes to explain himself, thinking it will earn him love. He apologizes for taking up space, thinking it will gain him acceptance. He justifies his boundaries, thinking it will make people respect them. All it does is weaken him, because every time you explain your power, you reduce it. Power is not democratic. It is not something you debate. It is something you embody. And the man who explains himself constantly teaches others that his word is negotiable, that his decisions are reversible, that his authority can be softened with guilt or pressure. But the man who moves with conviction, who speaks less, but with weight, he becomes the storm you never saw coming. Because real power is not revealed. It is sensed. It's in your eye contact, in your posture, in the stillness between your words. It's in your ability to say no without needing to explain why, to walk away without announcing your departure, to change the temperature of the room without raising your voice. Think of every leader, ruler, strategist who ever commanded nations, corporations, armies, not by screaming, but by making others lean in. They were not always the most liked, but they were always the most respected, and often the most feared, because power, when invisible, becomes untouchable. So, if you are the man who's been shouting to be heard over giving to be noticed, over talking to be respected, stop. Your presence is your proof, not your performance. The man who can hold silence, who doesn't explain every decision, who can endure discomfort without reacting, he becomes unreadable. And unreadable men are never easy to manipulate. That is power. It is not cruelty. It is discipline. It is strategic restraint. And when the moment comes that you do speak, every word lands like a hammer, because you have built the weight of your voice through the silence that preceded it. So here's the truth. No one told you. You don't need to be louder to be heard. You need to be more grounded to be felt. Stop seeking attention. Start cultivating gravity. You want people to respect you. Then stop begging to be understood. You want to lead. Then stop performing for applause and start commanding the air around you. Because the men who are remembered, the ones who are followed, feared, and revered, they didn't win through noise. They won through a quiet presence so strong it could not be ignored. Selective cruelty is not a flaw. It is the wisdom to survive in a world that will exploit your softness and call it virtue. Let's strip away the fairy tales. The world does not reward good intentions. It rewards results. And sometimes those results require decisions that others do not have the stomach to make. You have been conditioned to believe that cruelty is always evil, that the strong man must also be endlessly merciful, that drawing blood, even metaphorically, makes you wrong. But that belief was planted in you by a system that fears powerful men, by a culture that romanticizes submission, by people who gain from your hesitation, because as long as you hesitate, you lose. You have seen this play out before, in relationships where you stayed too long because you didn't want to hurt her, in jobs where you swallowed disrespect because you didn't want to seem aggressive, in friendships where you gave and gave and gave until you were empty because you didn't want to be mean. But mercy without boundaries is not kindness. It is self-betrayal. And the truth is brutal. Not every person deserves your softness. Not every relationship deserves closure. Not every mistake deserves a second chance. There are moments in a man's life where cutting off is not cruelty, it is clarity. It is the moment you stop bleeding for those who would never bleed for you. Machiavelli knew this. He didn't write for the weak. He didn't write for the agreeable. He wrote for rulers. Men who understood the game beneath the game. Men who knew that survival sometimes requires silence, sometimes requires deception, and sometimes requires a clean, irreversible cut, not in anger, not in rage, but with precision. This is not about being vengeful, it's about being strategic. The man who can walk away when love becomes a leash, he lives. The man who can fire the employee who is loyal but incompetent, he thrives. The man who can say enough and mean it, he becomes ungovernable. Because mercy extended too long becomes a weakness others weaponize. They learn you can be guilted. They learn you can be emotionally blackmailed. They learn your boundaries are suggestions, not laws. And once they know that you are no longer a man, you are a servant. Let me make this clear. A man who cannot punish will always be punished. You do not need to scream. You do not need to threaten. You need to be capable. And you need to be willing. Willing to disappoint. Willing to be the villain in someone else's story. Willing to do what weak men avoid and strong men decide. Because power isn't about pleasing. It's about protecting. Protecting your vision, your peace, your standards, your future. And protection sometimes requires removal of people, of patterns, of past versions of yourself that were too polite to survive. There's a reason people respect the man who draws lines. Because in a world where everyone is trying to get something from you, the man who says no becomes dangerous. He becomes sacred. He becomes rare. So, let's talk about cruelty. True cruelty is allowing yourself to be drained while smiling through it. True cruelty is letting someone treat you like an option and calling it forgiveness. True cruelty is abandoning your purpose to make others comfortable. Selective cruelty, by contrast, is a form of love. Love for your future self. Love for your potential. Love for the life you are building that cannot carry the weight of dead things, because the man who cannot walk away from what wounds him dies with it. Machiavelli didn't praise cruelty for chaos, he praised it for control. He knew that the man who could strike once effectively and never again was not a tyrant. He was a leader. Mercy has a place. But so does finality. So if you are the man who always explains himself, always gives one more chance, always bends until he breaks, stop. You are not here to be endlessly available. You are not here to bleed approval. You are not here to turn the other cheek until there's nothing left of your face. You are here to choose. And sometimes that choice is uncomfortable. It hurts. It looks cold. But cold is not the enemy. Inconsistency is. You don't need to be cruel often. You just need to be willing to be done. With shaky boundaries, with disrespect, with patterns that keep you small. And when you are done, be done completely. No calls, no closure, no softness that invites reinfection. That's not evil, that's evolution. You're not a monster for refusing to carry what others won't fix. You're not heartless for protecting your peace like a fortress. You're not wrong for being selectively ruthless, because a man who cannot choose when to cut will eventually be cut by everything. The world does not reward kindness. It rewards scarcity. And the man who doesn't understand that will spend his life being liked but never respected. From the time you were a boy, they told you to be nice, to share, to give, to serve. They taught you that kindness was the golden ticket, that if you were helpful enough, soft enough, agreeable enough, everything you ever wanted would come to you. But look around. Is that the man who wins? No. The man who wins is the one who knows how to be scarce, not unavailable but measured. He understands that the more you offer without limit, the less anyone values you. Because people don't chase what's always there. They chase what they fear losing. This is the uncomfortable truth. No one teaches you. The more accessible you are, the more invisible you become. And the more available your time, your presence, your energy, the more people take you for granted. The man who always says yes, who never sets a boundary, who gives without question, he may be admired for a moment, but he is never respected long term. Because in the psychology of human behavior, what is abundant becomes disposable. You think kindness is the path to loyalty, but loyalty does not come from giving endlessly. Loyalty comes from being a man whose presence carries weight, because it is earned, not expected. Ask yourself, why do people remember the men who speak less? Why do they lean in when he finally talks? Why do they hesitate before crossing him? Because he is not always available. He is not desperate to be liked. He is strategically scarce, and that scarcity becomes value. Machiavelli understood this with brutal clarity. He wrote that generosity practiced constantly will destroy a man, because when you give too much too freely, people begin to expect it. They stop seeing it as kindness. They start seeing it as your role. You become the man they come to when they need something, not the man they respect. You become the option, not the standard. That's the tragedy of the good guy. He believes that if he just gives enough, he will eventually be chosen. But the truth is, you are not chosen for how much you give. You are chosen for how hard you are to replace. And that begins with controlling your access, your time, your attention, your presence. The man who gives his energy to everyone becomes empty. The man who protects his energy becomes powerful. So what does strategic scarcity look like? It looks like not answering every call. It looks like saying no when your peace is at risk. It looks like being kind but not available on demand. It's not about being arrogant. It's about being intentional. Because when your presence is selective, your impact becomes undeniable. When you show up less but sharper, you are remembered more. When you speak less but with more weight, you are heard deeper. And when you love but not to be needed, you are respected. Scarcity is not coldness. It is control, and control is power. You don't need to be cruel. You don't need to become stone. You simply need to stop offering yourself as an emotional buffet to people who are starving for attention but unwilling to give respect. This is where the shift happens. The nice guy fades into the background because he's always there. The man with presence walks into the room and the energy changes. Not because he's loud, but because he's not always around. And that's the difference. Ask yourself, are you being nice or are you being used? Are you present or are you performing? There is a man in you buried under years of compromise, silence, and craving who was never meant to beg for a seat at any table. He was born to command presence, but somewhere along the way you were taught to wait, to audition, to soften your edge, to chase approval like it was oxygen. And now you wonder why you feel invisible, why even after giving everything your time, your loyalty, your love, you're still overlooked, still passed by, still wondering when someone will finally choose you. But here's the truth, no one told you. The moment you beg to be chosen is the moment you become forgettable. Because men who are chosen are rarely the ones who chase. They are the ones who move like they don't need to be chosen. They are chosen because they are rooted in something deeper than performance. They are chosen because they don't compete, they command. This world does not reward the man who waits. It rewards the man who takes space, who speaks without apologizing, who shows up not to impress, but to declare I am not here to prove I am here to be. When you beg to be chosen, you shrink, you contort, you trade truth for acceptance, you over-explain, you overgive, you overstay, and worst of all, you abandon yourself. You start living on the emotional currency of others. Their validation becomes your nourishment, their approval your lifeline. But that's not love. That's emotional starvation dressed in politeness. Presence is not something you earn by becoming agreeable. Presence is something you cultivate by becoming undeniable. You cannot be chosen deeply until you've stopped begging quietly. Because the world senses it, that hunger in your eyes, that trembling behind your smile, that subtle desperation you try to hide with kindness. And they don't respect it. They exploit it. They enjoy it for a while until something more scarce, more rooted, more sovereign enters the room, and suddenly your background noise. That's the truth. No one remembers the man who tried to be enough. They remember the man who knew he already was. Machiavelli understood this. He warned that those who rely on the affection of others for their power will never last, because affection fades. But fear, respect, presence that lingers. You don't need everyone to like you. You need your presence to do the talking before your mouth even opens. So how do you shift? You stop waiting for an invitation. You stop auditioning for love, for opportunities for recognition. You start walking like the room belongs to you, not because of arrogance, but because of alignment. Because when you know your value, you don't chase alignment, you attract it. You draw boundaries like a man who knows he's not afraid of being alone. You say no like a man who knows what he deserves. You stay silent like a man who knows silence is a weapon. And not everyone deserves your truth. The man who commands presence doesn't raise his voice to be heard. He lowers it and the world leans in, not because they fear his anger, but because they fear losing his access. This is not about domination. It's about self-possession. You must become the man who doesn't flinch when he's misunderstood, who doesn't chase after those who drift, who doesn't beg to be loved, but simply becomes so whole, so still, so sharp, that to be in his presence feels like privilege. Because that is the essence of masculine power. Not performance, not pleasing, not pleading, but being centered, being deliberate, being calm under pressure, being rooted in standards so firm that anyone who cannot meet them disqualifies themselves. So ask yourself, how many times have you begged to be chosen in love, in work, in friendship? How many times have you waited for someone else to see your worth before you claimed it, and how long will you keep doing that? Because there comes a moment in every man's life where he has to decide, am I the one chasing presence or becoming it? When that moment comes, don't blink, don't fold, don't shrink. Rise, not with noise but with stillness, not with apologies but with presence, not with the hunger to be chosen but with the quiet power of knowing that you already are, not by others but by yourself. That is when everything changes. That is when the world stops to take notice. And that is when you stop chasing your place in it and start commanding it. There's a kind of man who doesn't flinch when chaos walks in. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't rush to prove himself. He doesn't perform for attention. He just is anchored, unbothered, and quietly powerful. You feel it the moment he enters the room. People shift. Conversations pause. Not because he demands it, but because his energy commands it. There's something in him that doesn't rattle, something you can't quite name, but you know better than to test it. This is the man who has stopped chasing external validation. He no longer fights to be heard, liked, or seen. Because he has learned something most men never do, true power is internal. Not the kind that shouts, not the kind that dominates the room through volume or aggression, but the kind that withstands, that absorbs, that bends without breaking and doesn't leak. The world trains men to believe that power is about dominance, about controlling the external. But that's false power, loud power, temporary power, real power, the kind that lasts lives in your ability to stay composed when most would collapse. It's the power of the storm that never needs to announce itself. But let's not lie. This kind of inner power is rare. Why? Because it's not taught, it's forged. It's earned through fire solitude and the brutal process of watching yourself fall and choosing to rise again without anyone clapping for you, without applause, without permission. That's the edge. You don't gain internal power by being liked. You gain it by being unshakable. Because here's the truth. The man who can't hold his ground under pressure isn't feared, he's forgotten. He might be charming. He might be agreeable. But when tension rises and eyes look to him for leadership, he folds. And in that moment, his presence evaporates. Real presence is not about how much space you take up. It's about what you can contain. Your anger, your fear, your disappointment, your hunger, your pride, your silence. It's not about suppressing it, it's about mastering it. Machiavelli warned us centuries ago, a ruler must be like the lion and the fox, bold when necessary, invisible when strategic. But what both have in common is control, calculation. They do not react to every threat they select their battles. They do not expose emotion to win sympathy. They weaponize restraint to earn respect. And in today's world, restraint is mistaken for weakness. Silence is misread as submission. Calm is confused with indifference. But the man who can remain still in a world addicted to noise, he is dangerous, because the loudest man in the room is often the weakest. He needs to be heard. He needs to be validated. He needs attention to exist. But the man who can hold tension without spilling it, the one who walks away without explaining that man becomes unforgettable. He is the wolf among barking dogs. So ask yourself this: what do you carry, and how do you carry it? Do you break under pressure, or do you bend? Do you explain your every move, or do you let silence speak for you? Do you panic when ignored, or do you wait until they have to pay attention? Because internal power is not glamorous. It's not viral. It doesn't always come with praise. but it's the one form of power that cannot be taken from you. Because it's not built on approval, it's built on discipline. Discipline to stay calm when others rage. Discipline to choose clarity over reaction. Discipline to wait, not because you're weak, but because you're calculating. That's what separates the king from the crowd. That's what keeps you untouchable when others are unraveling. And no, it's not about pretending to be emotionless. It's about learning to hold your fire without burning your house down, to feel deeply but move wisely, to be underestimated until it's too late. Because there is nothing more terrifying than a man who is calm when he should be angry, focused when he should be frantic, still when others are loud. He has become the threat you never saw coming. And the truth is, any man can become him. But first, you must stop giving your power away. Every time you over-explain, you're leaking power. Every time you try to win love with approval, you're leaking power. Every time you explode because you were triggered instead of grounded, you've given your enemy the blueprint to destroy you. Stop bleeding emotionally in public. Start building emotional weight in silence. Because presence is not about being everywhere. It's about what people feel when you are. Let your stillness make them second guess. Let your eyes say what your words never will. Let your composure become the reason they don't try you. And when the time comes to act, don't bark. Strike once, cleanly, without apology, then disappear again into the stillness they feared the most. That's power, not performance, not pretense, but presence. And it lives in the man who no longer needs to prove because he has already become. They told you loyalty was a virtue. They told you it made you noble, that if you stayed endured, gave everything, and asked for nothing, you'd be remembered. You'd be loved. You'd be safe. But they lied. Loyalty, when stripped of power, isn't a virtue. It's a leash. And that leash is what hangs most men silently from the ceilings of their own lives. Because loyalty without leverage doesn't elevate you, it uses you. You become the man who is always there, always available, always agreeable. And in return, you're not protected. You're not respected. You're tolerated until you're no longer needed. That's the tragedy. You spent your life trying to be good, to be dependable, to prove your worth through consistency, patience, obedience. You stayed in places long after your soul whispered leave. You held your tongue when every fiber of your being begged you to speak. And you called it love, called it integrity, called it being a man. But it wasn't. It was fear. The fear of being alone, of starting over, of being called selfish. So you gave yourself away in pieces, trading power for approval. And when you finally looked in the mirror, the man staring back at you was hollow. Loyal, yes, but forgotten. This is the fate of the man who confuses sacrifice with strength. You see, Machiavelli never glorified blind loyalty. He warned against it. He understood what most men refuse to see: loyalty, when unreciprocated, is exploitation. The world doesn't admire your devotion. It weaponizes it. Your boss praises your work ethic until you become expensive. Your partner praises your kindness until you grow a spine. Society tells you to be a good man, right before it punishes you for having boundaries. And when you finally draw a line, when you finally speak up, they don't thank you. They call you difficult, disloyal. They turn on you like you were never one of them, because you weren't. You were their tool. That's what you become when you offer loyalty without terms. A utility, something to be used, and the moment you stop being useful, you're replaced. The painful truth is this history does not remember the loyal. It remembers the decisive, the ones who knew when to walk away, when to cut ties, when to stop bleeding for causes that had no soul left. The man who rises is not the man who stays. It's the man who knows when enough is enough. So ask yourself, who are you being loyal to? A relationship that shrinks you? A company that underpays you? A belief system that no longer reflects who you are? Are you loyal? Or are you afraid? Because most men stay not out of honor, but out of habit, out of conditioning, out of a desperate need to avoid the pain of change. But comfort is not the same as growth, and endurance is not the same as power. If your loyalty costs you your voice, your dignity, your future, then it's no longer loyalty. It's enslavement. Machiavelli wrote, "A prince must know when to be both lion and fox," meaning he must know when to stay and when to disappear. That's the difference between a man who rules his life and a man who merely survives it. You must learn to treat your loyalty not as a gift, but as a contract, with boundaries, with terms, with the right to revoke when the cost becomes too high. Because the man who can't walk away will always be walked over. So stop handing out loyalty like a badge of honor. Start treating it like a loan, reserved for those who bleed for you, who grow with you, who protect what matters to you. Be loyal to the vision you're building. Be loyal to the man you're becoming. Be loyal to your inner fire, your instinct, your worth. Not to those who only clap when you're useful. And understand this, the world will never tell you when to reclaim your power. It benefits from your silence. It profits from your loyalty. It feeds on your hesitation. So you must decide, are you the dog they trained or the wolf they fear? Because the wolf is not blindly loyal. He is discerning. He walks alone when needed. He doesn't explain his departure, he enforces it. And that's what you must become. Not cruel, not cold, clear. Clear about what you will no longer serve. Clear about the cost of your time, your presence, your loyalty. Because the next time someone tells you to be loyal, ask yourself this: to what, to whom, and at what price? Because you weren't born to obey. You were born to lead, and no man leads while leashed. There's a man dying every day, and no one notices. Not because his heart has stopped beating, but because his soul has. He walks the world as a ghost seen but not felt, heard but never remembered, smiling, apologizing, saying yes when he means no, hoping his compliance will earn him love, hoping his loyalty will buy him protection, hoping that if he just keeps being good, the world will finally give him what he deserves. But the world doesn't reward goodness. It rewards gravity. It remembers the man who makes it shift, not the agreeable, not the invisible, not the soft-spoken saint who folds under pressure. It remembers the one who holds the room in silence, who doesn't raise his voice but still gets heard, the man who no longer chases approval because he understands that power isn't given, it's declared. And that declaration begins with death, the death of the nice guy, the man trained to kneel before conflict, conditioned to earn worth through obedience, groomed to be gentle, helpful, easy to manage, the one who was praised for being predictable, who feared rejection more than he feared regret. But here's the truth that cracks the lie. Niceness isn't virtue. It's a performance. And performances end. That's where rebirth begins, not in noise, not in rage, but in clarity. The moment you stop begging for permission and start acting from vision. You were never supposed to stay harmless. Harmlessness is not a strength. It's a strategy that benefits everyone except you. The moment you believe that being likable is the highest currency, you trade your spine for smiles, and your presence becomes weightless. This is how men disappear, slowly, quietly, in the name of peace. But peace without power is surrender. And you weren't born to surrender. You were born to lead. That's why something in you has been stirring. The discomfort, the inner rebellion, the growing disgust with how often you've had to mute your truth to make others comfortable. That's not dysfunction, it's instinct returning. It's your edge waking up. And when it wakes, it doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't explain itself. It moves. The rebirth of the dangerous man isn't loud, it's surgical. You begin to observe instead of perform. You measure rooms not to fit in, but to take control. You stop chasing love and start embodying presence. You realize that fear, not popularity, is the true foundation of influence, because love is conditional, fleeting. But fear governs behavior before a word is spoken. You learn the art of strategic silence, not as avoidance, but as dominance. You become unreadable, not because you lack emotion, but because you refuse to leak it. Your stillness becomes a warning. Your words few but final. You kill the compulsion to explain yourself, because kings don't clarify, they decree, and the world responds. Suddenly, people watch how they speak to you, not because you threaten them, but because they can't read you. They don't know what you're thinking, and that makes you dangerous. This is not cruelty, it's control. This is not ego, it's edge. It's the kind of power that doesn't beg for space, it takes it. It's not interested in being liked, it's interested in being remembered. And for that, you must strip away the conditioning that made you small. You must kill the part of you that flinches in the face of disapproval. You must unlearn the lessons of obedience disguised as love. Machiavelli wrote, "A wise man must learn how not to be good when the situation requires it." And this is that situation. Because when a man has no edge, he becomes a placeholder. A man who's always there, always kind, always dependable, until he's no longer convenient and then he's forgotten. But the dangerous man. He's not discarded, he's feared. Not because he's reckless, but because he's unshakable, strategic, discerning. He chooses when to speak, when to strike, when to disappear, and when he does move, it's final. So let this be your reminder you don't need to yell. You don't need to be cruel. You only need to become the man who cannot be moved, who knows his worth so deeply it makes others question theirs. Let them call you distant. Let them say you've changed. Let them feel the weight of your absence when you withdraw your energy. That's not cruelty. That's transformation. You are not here to be tolerated. You are here to be a force. And if that means some will walk away, let them. If that means your silence makes others uncomfortable, good, because that silence speaks louder than your old compliance ever did. This is not about violence. This is about voltage. The kind of voltage that shifts the air when you walk into the room, that bends behavior without raising a finger, that rewrites your story without saying a word. This is the power that was always in you, but buried under guilt, fear, and the illusion that being agreeable was the price of being loved. It's not. The real price of love is presence and the willingness to lose it rather than lose yourself. So, rise, not as the man they trained you to be, but as the one you were born to become. In a world that praises politeness but rewards power, too many men lose themselves chasing approval. From a young age, they're taught to be agreeable, to lower their heads, say yes, and be liked. But over time, this conditioning kills something vital, the edge, the instinct, the self-respect that makes a man unforgettable. The message is clear: if you don't set your own value, the world will undervalue you. Respect doesn't come from being nice, it comes from being firm. Loyalty without boundaries becomes a leash. Silence without strength becomes invisibility. The modern man must unlearn the belief that being harmless equals being good. Real virtue isn't submission, it's discernment. Speak when it matters, walk away when it's necessary, and stop justifying your worth. This isn't about cruelty, it's about clarity. If you've been bending to fit in, it's time to rise and take up space. In love, in work, in life, those who earn respect are not the most agreeable, but the most grounded. The ones who move with quiet conviction and refuse to kneel for approval. Let this be your shift from passive to powerful, from liked to legendary.